All right. Well, welcome to the Mark Allen Coaching Zwift Group Shed Talk live chat on Facebook. Big title. What it means is I get to share some stories, information with you. I try to do this every weekend, and if you do miss it for any reason, you can always go back into the Zwift group, and it's recorded, so you'll be able to view it later. Today, I just want to share some stories. I think, in some ways, some of the best information about how you can be better at triathlons or running or whatever sport you're doing at the moment is to hear stories of what somebody else did. There's obviously the specific day-to-day coaching advice, which is indispensable. You need to be doing the right kind of training to get fit. But then there's also those subtle things that happen in training and in racing that can make a difference between a good race and an incredible race. Just so you have a little background of where I came from in the sport of triathlon, when I was a kid, I was actually a swimmer. Let me just back up for one sec. So I'm going to tell these stories, and then at the very end, I'm going to share what the secrets were and what you will be able to apply to your racing so that you do have one of those just amazing days in your next race or throughout the season, throughout the course of years to come. So anyway, when I was a kid, I was a swimmer. I swam from the time I was 10 years old all the way until I finished college at age 21. And as a swimmer, if I got just one stroke behind somebody in a race, 100 back was my main event, 200 back, 100, 200 back. If I got just a little bit behind, half a stroke, a full stroke, my race was done. My brain just kind of said, you know what, there's no way that I can make up this time. This person's pulling away. I can't do it. I'd get tight, and for sure they would win. I had to really pretty much be even or move into the lead early if I ever had a chance of winning a race. When I got into the sport of triathlon, it was 1982. I was 24 years old. The very first triathlon that I did was called the USTS, United States Triathlon Series race in San Diego. And I had never done a triathlon before. I'd only trained for a few months. I had no idea what to expect. I had a decent swim because I was a swimmer in college. My bike actually kind of held its own. I mean, a few people got ahead of me. I was definitely not in the lead. And when I got off the bike, I was in fourth place. And I was told that I was in fourth place. I'm thinking, wow, that sounds pretty darn good, right? And so when I started the run, I headed out. I had no idea how to pace it. It was an Olympic distance race. Actually, the run was 15K instead of 10K, but the swim was 1,500 meters. The bike was 40 kilometers, 25 miles. And so anyway, early on in the run, a guy came up from behind me. His name was Dale Basescu. And he passed me and he started to pull away. And so immediately my swimmer's mental tape started playing, saying, oh, he's pulling away from me. There's no way I can stay with him. He's going to end up in fourth place. I'll end up in fifth at best. And then something just clicked, like inside me, that said, you know what? There's still a lot of time left on this run. Maybe that isn't how it's going to turn out. And so I just, all of a sudden, instead of getting tight, I actually relaxed. And Dale had put, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 yards on me. He stopped pulling away as I relaxed. And then I came back up and was running even with him. And then I ended up pulling away from him. And I indeed finished in fourth place that day. The three guys who were in first was first Dave Scott. Second place was Scott Molina. Third place was Scott Tinley. And I was fourth. So there was a lot of talk after the race because those guys already had established themselves as world-class triathletes back in 1982. This was my first race. And so people are saying, hey, who is this guy who just, finished a little bit behind three of the best guys in the world? And, so on the outside, it looked like the most amazing part of that day was that I was actually kind of in the same ballpark with those guys, even though they were ahead of me, fourth place behind three of the best. But the most important part of that race was that I saw that just because somebody pulls away early doesn't mean that they're going to stay ahead of me. And so that was something that stuck with me and was a very pivotal, one of those words that catches me, pivotal moment in my triathlon racing. A year later, something happened that actually taught me so much, but it had nothing to do with my race. It was in 1983 at the Ironman in Hawaii. That year, Dave Scott was coming back. He'd won the race 2 times already. He was going to hopefully win his 3rd race. He ended up winning it, but the way he won it was very interesting. He was in the lead. Scott Tinley was in 2nd place. Scott Tinley had won the Ironman once already in February 1982. Dave Scott won it in October of 1982. These 2 guys were the head of the class. They were the ones setting the standard. Tinley was not anywhere near it. He wasn't near Dave. Dave had a big lead toward the middle part of the marathon. As Dave approached the final miles of the marathon, he began to run out of gas. He began to fall apart. He was struggling. He was barely able to get across that finish line. He won it, but his eyes were almost rolling back in his head as he crossed the line. He completely collapsed at the end. It was probably one of the most exhausted I've seen anyone win that race when they crossed the line. Scott Tinley finished, I think it was 37 seconds behind him. And what happened was that Tinley was so far back at one point in the marathon that he just kind of, he didn't exactly give up, but he didn't stay on it. And then at another point in the marathon, he stopped to go to the bathroom. He went into one of the porta potties. Took his time. He wasn't really worried. There was nobody that was going to catch him, and he couldn't even see Dave Scott ahead of him. Finally, with just a couple miles to go, Tinley heard that Dave was faltering, and all of a sudden he got back on pace, and he started pushing, and he finished, like I said, I think 37 seconds behind Dave, the closest finish in Ironman history between 1st and 2nd. And what I got from that was that you just never know how the race is going to turn out. So every second counts to stay on it no matter what, because had Tinley stayed on his pace and had kept pushing instead of kind of just, holding his position, he would have won. Dave Scott would not have won that title. Dave Scott may have only been a 5-time Ironman champ. Anyway, so that really stuck with me as something to keep in the back of my mind, like, especially in an Ironman, no matter what's going on, stay on pace. Don't lose a second. Every second might count. Earlier that year, in 1983, I opened my season at a half Ironman distance race in Panama City, Florida. And the guy who was there that I was trying to beat was Dave Scott. This was my 2nd year in triathlon. The first year I had won a big half Ironman distance race in San Diego called the Horny Toad Triathlon. In that race, a very hilly bike ride, I just went all out because I had nothing to lose. I didn't know quite how to pace a half Ironman. It was my first half Ironman distance race. And I came off the bike in the lead, and I held it on the run. So I thought, wow, maybe this is a good distance for me. 1983, opening season race, Panama City half Ironman. Dave Scott was there. He was the guy that I was trying to beat. So I went all out on the bike in Panama City. I figured, if I can go all out on a hilly bike and win, beating that at the Horny Toad Triathlon, I beat Dave Scott, Scott Tinley. I can do it certainly on Panama City's pancake flat course, right? Mistake, big mistake. I went really hard on the bike. I fell apart on the run. Dave Scott won. He passed me, I think, 3 miles into the half Ironman distance run, half marathon run. And so the next year I thought, what did I do wrong? Was it that I went too hard? Because a flat bike ride shouldn't take that much out of me. Then I realized that when you're working on a flat course like that the load on your legs is constant. It never changes. On the hilly course at the Horny Toad Triathlon, I had uphills, I had flats, I had downhills. I was using all these different muscles in my legs. So everything was kind of getting a rest depending on what I was using. If I was using my climbing muscles, it wasn't the same exact muscles as I would use when I am in my aero position on a flat. And when I'm going downhill, certainly my heart rate drops, all of my muscles can relax. Panama City, the load is constant from the first pedal stroke of that bike ride. So in 1984, a year later, I did a couple training sessions a week in all throughout the winter on my stationary trainer. 2 1-hour sessions twice a week to have a constant load on my legs. I went to Panama City, opened my season in '84, went hard the entire bike ride, stayed on my pace, had an incredible half marathon run, won it. Dave Scott wasn't there, but it was one of the best half Ironmans I ever did in my career. So I saw that, okay, I need to train specifically for each race and make sure that I am ready to do what that race is going to demand, even if it looks like it's going to be an easy course, because it is flat. Flat is not always easy. An interesting race came in 1992. It was the Zofingen Duathlon in Switzerland. It starts with a 5-kilometer run, then it goes into about a 70-kilometer bike ride, 120 kilometers, and then it finishes with a 30-kilometer run. Incredibly challenging. The first 5K are these loops that go uphill and downhill, and I knew that the pace was going to be fast. I knew that the hills were steep. I had trained with Ken Souza, who was one of the best duathletes ever in history, and he had done the race. He explained to me what to be looking for and how to prepare for it. Well, I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. The first 5K run that we did, it was the most painful 5K that I'd ever done. Guys were going so fast, and those hills completely destroyed my legs. So by the time I was only about 15 minutes into the race, I was almost done. Still had to ride 70 miles, still had to run almost 20 miles at the end of it, on a lot of it on trails, that second run. But it's a long run. And so anyway, I finished 4th. The guy in 3rd place was over 40 years old. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not about age, it's about something that I'm doing in my training. The next year, I went back to Zofingen, but I changed my training. I did very, very steep interval work on hills to be ready for that 5K run. I also did a lot more cycling on hills that were very steep because the bike was also steep. And I had underestimated the demand of the bike ride. It was a 3-loop course, three-loop bike ride. In '92, my first loop, I held back a little bit, and then I started going for it in the second loop. And then in the third loop, I was exhausted and people were passing me. 1993, I went much easier on the first loop. I built a little bit more in the second loop of the bike, and then on the third loop of the bike, that's when I went hard, and I was passing other guys. I ended up winning that year. And again, it was just seeing that, okay, what I had done in the year before wasn't the right kind of training, but I knew that I could modify it and come back stronger, which is what I did. The last race that I want to tell you about is one that happened also in 1993. It was my final Nice Triathlon, and I had won the race 9 times. I was coming back hoping to win number 10. Incredible run that I had there. One of the guys that was racing that year was Simon Lessing, one of the best short distance triathletes ever in history. One of the best triathletes, period, at almost any distance. It was his first Nice Triathlon. And I knew that he was going to be one of the guys that would really be pushing me, and probably be the guy that I would have to, if it came down to a head-to-head battle, try to figure out how I was going to beat this guy. Because he's much younger, he has much better leg speed on the run than I do. And so anyway, the swim, he was ahead of me. He came out of the water ahead of me. I didn't see him. He's a great swimmer. Bike ride, I never saw him. I was never in the same place with him. He was always ahead of me. And when I came into transition off of the bike, I kept waiting to see where Simon was. Where was he? To see if he had run out already. Well, I got to the transition area, and Simon was just standing there. he was dressed, ready to go for the run, and he was waiting for me. And I thought, now that's a pretty smart strategy. He knew that he probably didn't know quite how to pace the run, which in Nice was a 32-kilometer run, 20 miles. He'd never done the race before. He figured Mark Allen knows how to pace this thing. He's won the thing 9 times. Better to stay with me and hopefully use me as the pacing mechanism so that if he can stay with me at the very end of the run, he knows that certainly he would out-sprint me. So Simon, right away, as we started out on the run together, he pulled in right behind me. Right behind me. He was going to gain every advantage he could. And you can get just a slight amount of drafting if you're right behind someone on the run, especially if there's a headwind. I didn't like that. I'm thinking, okay, Simon, let's race together. Do not do this thing where you're getting every little advantage off of me. I know that I'm going to set the pace for us. And so I went to one side of the road to see if I could get him to come around. Well, he stayed right with me. Then I went to the other side of the road, and he stayed right with me. I went back again. I slowed down. He slowed down. He wouldn't come around me. Finally, I literally stopped running. And I said, Simon, please run next to me. Do not run behind me this whole run. He came around. He started running. I tried to pull in behind him for a moment, but of course, he just pulled off. And so we were running together for maybe a minute or two, and then he kind of pulled back in. And this went on for the first half of the run. He'd come around just for a tiny bit and then pull back in. We made the turn, 10 miles to go to come back, and it was clear that the pace we were going, he was going to be able to hold. And I thought, if it comes down to a sprint, he has it. He's faster than me. There's no way I can outsprint him. And I knew that I had to get rid of him somehow, but for the next 5 miles, I just couldn't come up with a solution. You see, I'd never been in this position before. Certainly with Dave Scott in Kona in 1989, we were literally step for step the entire marathon until I was able to break away on the final hill. But in that race, it was a different dynamic because I knew that I was a faster runner than Dave, and I knew that on that final hill where I did pull away from him, that I would be stronger. And so the strategy of how I was going to hopefully win had formulated just past the half marathon point, actually. So I had a lot of time to think about it and plan. Simon, I didn't know how I was going to drop him. The run course in Nice is flat, and it goes along the Mediterranean, just an out and back run course. I had to come up with a strategy, but it wasn't coming. It wasn't coming. It wasn't coming. Finally, I realized, let's see. Simon is a much better sprinter than I am. However, I feel like I have better sustained speed over a long period of time than he does. And so the strategy came. What I did was I said, okay, when I had about 5 miles to go, I said, now is when my sprint starts. I can't wait till the final 400 meters or 1,000 or 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers from the finish to sprint. I needed to start my sprint with 5 miles to go. And so what I did is I started to just gradually up my speed. And I thought, what I'm going to do is keep building my speed little by little by little by little at such a slow pace that hopefully Simon will not even notice that my pace is actually picking up. Hopefully he will start to think that he's just getting tired and that he can't hold this. Because if I surged, he could surge with me and hold a surge for 500 meters, a kilometer. But I just ratcheted up my pace. And what I was going to do was go from 90% to 91%, and then 92, and 93, and 94, and 95, and get up to about, if I had to, 99% with about a kilometer, 500 meters to go. So that indeed, if it did come back down to a sprint, that I wasn't already at maximum speed. And so I just did that. I started building so slowly that Simon did not even know that I was actually building my pace. And eventually, with a couple kilometers to go, he snapped. The rubber band snapped. He dropped back a few feet, and then a few meters, and a little bit more, and I didn't look back. And eventually, I couldn't even hear his footsteps anymore. And I went and I went and I went, but I still kept building because I did want to hit that 99% in case somehow he was able to come back on me. I never looked back. I won the race, my 10th Nice title. It came with a strategy that I had never thought of before and that I had never needed to put into play before. So those are some stories from my career. And I wanted to give you a secret, right? What is the secret to winning? What is the secret to having your best race? The secret, and it's pretty simple, is that every race that you do, try to learn something. In that first USTS race, I learned that what goes on inside of your mind has such a tremendously powerful impact on your race. That tape that started to play like, oh, Dale Lasesky's pulling away, and all of a sudden I go, wait a minute, that doesn't mean the race is over. I relaxed, and I came back on him. I pulled away from him eventually. That was a critical piece. That was what I learned in that race. When I saw Scott Tinley lose by 37 seconds because he didn't stay on pace, I learned something from that race. I was in the race that year. I ended up third, but I was never in competition with those guys at the Ironman in 1983. But I learned something by tuning into what had happened with the other guys. Stay on pace. Don't ever lose 1 second or one moment where you just sort of give up. You can regroup. You can slow down if you need to, but that has to be part of your strategy. The Zofingen duathlon. I saw that, yeah, I had a tough day that first year in 1992. But I also saw that if there were things that I could change in my training that could help me to come back the next year and be stronger. And it did end up being enough for a win that year. 1983, at the beginning of the season, Panama City, Florida, trying to beat Dave Scott, thinking I could just go as hard as I could. And I did go as hard as I could on the bike, seeing that I blew up on the run. And I, again, looked at it and said, is there something that I could do differently in my training so that I can go really hard on this dead flat course that uses the same muscles the entire way? Yeah, I did those stationary bike sessions, and they got me to the point where my legs could stand a constant load that just never let up. I did that in 1984, won that race. That final Nice race, 1993, Simon Lessing, giving me one of the toughest challenges I'd ever experienced there at that race. I had to learn something in the race. It had nothing to do with what I was going to do the next year if I lost this year, because there would be no other year. I knew that was going to be my last Nice triathlon, 1993. I had to learn something in the race. And that can be the hardest, because we have a strategy. We have what our plan is of how we're going to have our best day. And when something comes up that is unexpected, then we have to be able to modify and change on the spot, in the moment, to then make it past that challenge. And so as you heard in that story, I just slowly built my pace more and more and more and more, so that he didn't feel like it was a surge, so that he just felt like he was getting tired because it was getting harder and harder to match what I was doing. And then, as I said, the rubber band snapped, he began to fall back. I held that pace all the way to the finish, won my 10th Nice triathlon. So I hope you've enjoyed those stories. I have a lot of them from my career, but what I wanted to try to highlight again in this live chat was that the true secret to having great races, certainly it starts by having that base of fitness that you build, like you can get with my coaching, smart training that challenges you but doesn't burn you out, that gives you base building, that gives you speed work, that tapers you just right. But then there's going to be those subtle things that if you look for them, you will learn in each and every race experience that you have. Some of them, the things you learn won't be earth-shattering, and you may never use it again. It just might be something that you learned after that day that you don't ever truly apply in the future. But you might also learn something or see something that you can do differently the next time, the next year, when you come back to a race that maybe didn't turn out quite the way you want, that will enable you to have this incredible performance, this incredible race experience, one that you know you're capable of having. So that's the secret. Again, there really are no secrets, are there? Learn from each race that you do. And when you do that, you're going to have an incredible journey through the sport of triathlons. Let me see if there's any questions here. You can always post these in. So anyway, no real questions. I really appreciate everybody coming today. Again, you can, this video will be posted in the Zwift group. It takes a while for it to get loaded up and loaded in there, but it'll be up there. You can go back and look at it. We'll be having another Zwift group ride this coming Tuesday. I'll post something about that tomorrow. And I hope you've enjoyed these stories. I hope that you have learned something through the things that I learned, and not that you may need to apply any of those lessons that I learned, but hopefully that it will spark something in you to kind of, when you're done with your race, when it's all over, you can look back and say, okay, what was in there for me? What can I do differently the next time so that I have an even better race the following year, or in the following race that I do? In the race, always be willing to change something or learn something that you can apply right then to turn your race around to have an even better performance, or to overcome a challenge that is facing you, so that you can overcome your Simon Lessing, who is running right next to you, and you're trying to figure out, how the heck am I going to drop this guy? Okay, hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Thanks for stopping by at the Mark Allen Coaching Zwift group live chat on Facebook, brought to you from the shed where I record all my shed talks. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.